Mobile first responsive design is a gargantuan topic, and it involves a lot of different moving pieces, including but not limited to business strategy, customer experience, user experience design, UI design, HTML, CSS, probably some sort of JavaScript framework, and lots of testing on multiple devices, not only the design, but also the code. There could be multiple courses created on each one of these topics that I'm gonna mention, and it would still just scratch the surface. So I wanna cover the 3 most important topics on the matter that deal specifically with interface design for responsive websites. A lot of these tactics actually spill over into iOS design and Android design once you realize how the fluid layout and how the flow of the elements work. And especially now that there are so many hybrid apps that are built with web technologies like React, React Native, etc., that are ported into iOS and Android and even desktop apps. So it's really good to get a handle on this responsive nature, and it's just going to help you in every single aspect that you design for. Here are the topics. Number 1, a fundamental understanding of how responsive websites work and their constraints. Number 2, examples of why and how to design mobile first. And number 3, examples of why and how to design desktop first. What scenario indicates you should design mobile first, and what scenario might indicate you should design desktop first. So to design better responsive interfaces, it's best to have a solid grasp on what's possible inside the browser. So we're going to take a look at this code pen, and we're going to change a number of these layouts to watch the exact same content change. So I've got all of my HTML over here on the left, a little bit of CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript to kind of update these cards. Every single one of these layouts is different, and it's all written right in here. I don't want to go too deep on all the code. I just want to really show you what's possible. And just so you know, this is Pug, which is a preprocessor for HTML. The output would look something like this. For this block, it's just a div with 2 class names and the number 1. That's literally what this block is. So each class name has a different color assigned to it, and that's how all this works. I'm gonna go to full page view here and just check out, this is a simple grid, just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Everything has the same width. If we did not have this in a grid and we clicked on flow, this is kind of naturally what's gonna happen here with these smaller blocks would just go from left to right, top to bottom. If we change the view on that to be this little sidebar, you can see when I start to scale the view window down, these are just going to start to wrap. And that's what's going to happen. Things are going to just wrap from left to right, top to bottom, all the way down, unless you override it with code. Most things are going to wrap this way. And that's just kind of like the natural flow of HTML. So if you have these 8 elements and everything's fluid and you have this fluid layout, you can either wrap them all until they turn into a big list, or you can turn them into a grid and you can manipulate it however you'd like. So these same 8 elements, we can say, you know what, let's keep it in a grid. And let's make the grid stretchy. And no matter how small we get, we're gonna have a 3 wide grid. And no matter how wide we get, we're gonna have a 3 wide grid. And then if we wanted to say, you know what, let's put this number 1, why don't we put that as like a full size header here? So now we have a big header, and now just like, okay, 2 and 3, maybe that's 50% each. So no matter what, we can say, we want a header to be full width. We want these to be 50%. We want this to be 75, so on and so forth. We can control every little aspect of this layout without much problem. If we want something to stick to the left, we have our left column here, various degrees of gridded items here with like a big footer down below. Again, we can change this however we'd like. And if we want it to change to a grid view when we get smaller, that's really easy to do with a media query. We don't have to have a button to click. You can just change it when it gets smaller. And I'll show that example in just a minute. We got our right view, so we can move the 1 all the way over to the right. Even though 1 is the first one in the source order, and it's going to naturally flow left to right, you can very easily stick this first thing all the way over here on the right. So in the fixed view, we can put number 1 and number 8 in a fixed position, and they're just going to stay right there. No matter how far we have to scroll, those will just stay in position, and we can put them wherever we want. If we look at full view, we can just say, you know what? Everything's in a single column. We want everything to be full width, and that's going to be no problem. You can even see, look at the left to right flow, top to bottom flow. Like, I haven't really told this stuff what to do. It's just going to naturally flow like that. I mean, I put some margin around it and rounded the corners, but that's just something that's naturally going to happen. And I could make this navigation look like this 1 through 8 And we could make these exact navigation pieces could look exactly like this. And it could be a big, long list-based navigation if we wanted to. So at any time, with media queries or with button clicks, we can change the layout. And it's all going to be stretchy because you might be on a big screen, you might be on a tablet, and you may be on a mobile screen. And so it's important to know that you can cycle between all of these different layouts really quickly. And once you understand this fluid layout and you can cycle through all these different fluid grid views and top align, left align, all these different views, this exact same principle and this way of thinking about elements on a screen will also apply to individual small little components. So if you look here, when we click on card, every single element is still here. None of this has changed. We're just kind of tweaking the CSS and we're calling a different class that just aligns the CSS slightly differently. But you can imagine this as a component. Say this is like an image. Maybe this is a caption for the image. Maybe this is a title. This could be an icon up here. Maybe this is body copy. Maybe color, price, and add to cart button. This exact module could size smaller and larger. You could turn it into big columns. So all of this data is easily positionable and movable, and it's fluid, and you can make it do whatever you want once you understand those constraints. So it can be really helpful to think about your mobile views as mini containers, and they can easily create a larger desktop experience. Some of these little containers might need to expand the full width of the desktop once we go a little bit larger and we change from a list view to a grid view. So you can see there's not any JavaScript happening right here. We're not calling any functions, no big programming. All of this stuff right down here is what I want to happen when the browser gets larger than 640 pixels wide. So as soon as that goes past 640, boom, we're going to be in grid view. And this is really easy to change. We can change this to be 1200 right now, wait for the code to update, and that's going to go into list view. You can kind of see the sizing down here, this little, as I'm moving it, but it's going to stay like that until I hit 1200. We can change that to 1800, really anything we want, and it's going to be full width until we go past that breakpoint. And the breakpoint can change anything you want it to. So I'm just going to keep it at 640 because that's a good size for this demo. But I just want to point out, you can change all of this stuff really easily between layouts with a little tiny bit of code. This little tiny bit of code right here is the only thing that's changing this layout. So if you have a little bit of front end skill or you know someone that does, you're going to realize that this is not a problem. And there's no issue between transitioning between different layouts, between different breakpoints, as long as it makes sense and you're not trying to go wild with something that's overly complicated for not much reason. So this is going to really empower your static designs, knowing that if you have two frames, two artboards side by side, and one of them is the mobile view and one of them is the desktop or tablet view, you can almost picture what's going to happen in between the two, and you can more intelligently explain to a developer how you envision this coming to life. All right, so here's another example where we have the exact same markup, but we've said, you know what, this is kind of like a left sidebar here, and this is going to be like our main content area. So imagine this is like filter or some kind of fixed navigation, and then we have this big content window on the right. So this column over here, it's got a fixed width. It's not moving anywhere. Now we could change this. We could change this to be a fluid column. What if we wanted it to be like half as wide as the other column? We could change that quite easily, and then it's going to be stretchy just like the other one. So you can have stretchy sidebars, you can have fixed sidebars, but sometimes you might not want that stretchy. So it's just helpful to know this when you're designing, because you can tell a developer, hey, this needs to be fixed width. It's not going to be moving around. Maybe the 8 doesn't even extend. You could technically center this, and then as the thing gets wider, you could center this in the entire window. So there's a lot of different options here. But notice, assume this is like 1 through 7 is our navigation. You can see that I put menu, I've got 1 through 7 in a slightly different section. I've got this in the menu section. So whenever I close this down, it's really easy to know that, okay, if the 8 is the main content window, then this is going to get a little too small to show the menu and the main content. So now we can just pop in a menu button. I put it right here, but you could have your hamburger menu up here. You can have a navigation over here. You can position this anywhere you want. And then you can have this, click this button and it opens the menu. And then you can have a close button that closes that menu. So opening and closing these little items here. But then once you go large, you pop that menu right back out and it's no problem. So it's really, really easy to hide things. And then on mobile, you have a little toggle to show and hide it. So if you think of this section right in here, if you think of this as like your mobile navigation, but then on a large view, it's like, okay, where can we put that mobile navigation? Is there a column that we could put that same mobile navigation in? And maybe we turn this main content into a grid view or something. There's lots of different possibilities that you can play around with this. So if you get into these code pins and start clicking around and resizing the browser, if you haven't done that before, it'll really just unlock a lot of different possibilities for you in terms of what's possible and what's not. And that's going to make your static designs that much better, armed with the knowledge of how it can work in the browser. If you're not familiar with the way some of this works, or if you have a question, there's absolutely no problem to fire off a message or text someone or DM someone who you know is a developer and say, is this possible? If I have a navigation that looks like this and we want to do that in between browser sizes, just ask a developer their opinion, because they're going to know that constraint. And I can't tell you how many times I've done that myself, especially when I was just getting started learning the ins and outs of front end code, where a developer friend of mine would say, actually, this is the way you could do it. This layout would make sense. And it will just save so much headache between trying to design something that doesn't make sense from a code perspective and vice versa. So communicate early. And if you don't know how the layout works, then just ask someone who does, and it will greatly impact your designs. All right, so now that we have the fundamentals out of the way, let's talk about why would we design mobile first? Well, mobile first is my all-time favorite way to design applications, especially when there is more functionality involved than just clicking around in an HTML-based marketing website. So if there's some type of responsive web application and you have user profiles and there's filtering and different functionality that happens within the application, I always design that mobile first, because I find that it forces the prioritization of the content from the top to the bottom. You're not going to have a big panel on the left and a panel on the right and have a big conversation about, well, this should be over there. And it just it forces you into this tiny view, and it's really easy to determine, okay, here's the navigation. This is the first thing we're going to show. This is the second thing we're going to show. It just forces that constraint, and it allows for you to add gradual progressive enhancement as it gets larger. Maybe you add those extra columns in, but then by that time, you've already decided what's most important and what's kind of coming from the top down. Also, if you have to distill complex information, it's so much easier to boil it down into simple flows, because you simply have a tiny little image to work with. It's a very small form factor. And so you must distill complex things down into a simple screen with a very clear call to action and very clear secondary action. So if you can distill that complex problem down into a small screen, then designing for the desktop is going to be much, much easier, because remember, those small screens can turn into columns for the left side or the right side or the top. And then you have content that could fly out into a larger grid view. You could put your content into 3 or 4 or 5 columns when the screen gets large enough. But once you've made those decisions at a mobile level, it's going to be much, much easier to prioritize, the most important things, because everyone's got a phone in their pocket. Not everyone's walking around with a laptop. So if you can make something work on mobile very, very easily, then it's just going to be that much quicker to access and that much more powerful for everybody who's walking around with a phone in their pocket. So these are some wireframes from one of the first projects that I really was very intentional about designing mobile first. And it was a big transportation, logistics, shipping, and managing type of responsive web application. Lots of kind of complicated user flows. I sat down and designed these with the developer, with the CEO, and we had conversations about each one of these things before we ever got into the actual designs. And so even just doing this alone already started to prioritize functionality. And then, starting with signing up and kind of onboarding and all these different forms, this can be complicated. This can be really complicated. But if you have a small screen, you're forced to simplify it, and you're forced to make, very clear calls to action. And so I just have these screen after screen after screen of mobile views, and also, not always, you don't always have to do low fidelity designs, but something this complicated, I would definitely myself personally start with low fidelity designs like this. But this just helped us very, very quickly get started and help the developers kind of get started on the database creation, understanding how everything was going to work. Everything's kind of mapped out, and we could quickly prioritize everything by doing this type of mobile first design for this big, big application. And once we had a lot of those mobile layouts done and we started on the UI style, you can see that this could very easily be a little mobile screen. And if I scroll down here to show you these other ones, we've got our small mobile content here, but on this one page, this really complex module here, I'm showing, okay, if you scale this up a little bit, maybe I can bring Wednesday in line with Cambridge, Ohio, and I can bring the date in line with Athens, and then save search, edit, duplicate, archive. I know that all of this stuff can be manipulated based on that responsive example that we just looked at earlier. So if I know how all of this stuff can flow and cascade with each other, then it'll be much easier to figure out, how do I go from mobile to tablet-ish to a much larger layout, and what elements could I start to wrap, and this could be pinned to the right. But maybe on the mobile one, truckload and intermodal right here, this would start to crash into the title. So maybe on mobile, we have a little tiny media query that says, you know what, on this one, put it down there so we have a lot of room. We have a lot more room right here. And you can do this with individual modules. You can do it with individual pages. And it just really goes to show you, like, if you can narrow down the functionality on a mobile screen, and you know how the flow can work, and you know all the different options, or you have a friend or a developer that you can talk to get your questions answered about those things while you're designing it, you will be able to systematically start with a mobile, go a little bit larger. And if it gets too complicated, just isolate one of the components and figure that out first, and then go back and start adding in the navigation and the footer and all the other components that need to go in place. All right, here's another example of mobile first design. This was actually for a course platform that I created for another course that I made a long time ago called AI UX, that was actually all about designing wireframes like this inside of Illustrator. But I used the exact same process that I was teaching in that course, designing mobile first. I've got my syllabus here. You can see all the modules, all the lessons, got course progress. And once I'm trying to show, what's going to happen right here. You can see on this one, I have a little syllabus link, and this is what it looks like when it's opened up. But then once it gets here, the syllabus link is still there because there's not quite enough room to show all of the lessons and the menu and everything. But I want to show what it looks like now as a drop down. You can see this drop down is exactly the same layout as the mobile version. So I can fit this as a little flyout window. Remember, it can be a right-hand column, it can be a left-hand column, it can be an overlay. So you can reposition these any way you want, just like I showed you in those early examples. So in this one, I've got a mobile view for the navigation that turns into a little popover. But then on a larger screen, we've got plenty of room for it. So we can just stick it in the left column. And there's no problem transitioning with 3 different media queries. Sometimes, but you need to have a conversation with a developer about that, because maybe they have a better idea. But I know this is possible because I'm aware of how that code works. And you can see here too, this little module right here, once it goes wide, we're breaking that into 2 columns. So now we have this here and this over here. So instead of keeping that text getting longer and longer and longer, that text would look too long if we put it all the way across this big, big screen. So once we hit this breakpoint, we can easily add that 3rd column and just have a little bit of nice negative space down there, and we'll be good to go. Same thing for these screens. We're taking this content that would normally wrap. If we're all the way on this screen, you can see we've got, imagine those 1 through 8 blocks. We've got number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, kind of all in here. But then as we get smaller and smaller, we're wrapping that down into a simple 1 column wide layout that can continue to flow, continue to stretch however we want it to. So once we have that understanding, we can really start to position this stuff any way we want. All right, one more PDF of low fidelity wireframes for this mobile first stuff. This is actually the document that I created in the AI UX course This was a full redesign of like a big e-commerce site. So you can see here again, mobile first, figuring out the navigation, 4 columns instead of 2 when I'm transitioning between mobile and tablet, and then transitioning from full screen to popover on this view here. Now we could very, very well keep this same full width layout all the way across, and that would be no problem. That's just a design decision. But I know that we can do this if we decide this is better. And so I like to design mobile first for some key screens like this to get the kind of basic layout in place. So this is a category page, and we've got like a featured product, a couple of other smaller featured products, and then we have categories down below. We've got our newsletter and we've got our footer. And so knowing how this responsive grid can work, I'm gonna keep this stretched full width because I wanna keep that featured. Instead of keeping 2 wide here, I wanna go 4 wide and 4 wide on these others. Newsletter can expand just like this. We got the block 1, block 2, and they're just gonna go side by side. And then same thing with the footer. Instead of 2 columns, we end up having 5 columns right here, just to kind of round that out. As we go larger, we're keeping the same exact layout here, just deciding we could go with 5 columns if we wanted to, but we can just get larger images and we can size these up. Maybe we throw in like a nice fun little like rollover for some of the product features. But just kind of starting here makes it really easy to kind of make those decisions. And then once you get on those larger views, it's like, oh, okay, well, I've already figured this out on a mobile, on a smaller screen. Everything was already stacked. So now I can just start putting in the pieces or making them stretch or stay however I want based on the information that I know in terms of how everything can size and scale together. So once we have these key screens in place, maybe we throw in the mobile version of the filters or the sub menus. Once we have some of these key screens, you can see again, here's I would consider this, a kind of a key screen where we have mobile product detail. We've got the gallery, price, the size, the color, accessories, add to cart, and then extra specs, related products, so on and so forth. Well, now you can see, okay, what do we do with all these nicely little design components that we had on the mobile side? Now we can say, okay, you know what? Instead of having a thumb strip to swipe around on a tablet, it would be nice to just have these, maybe these flow. These are flowing just like the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 blocks. We keep a big image, and then we can just grab all this other stuff and stick it here, make it a little wider to fill the space, because we know we can take something that was once a list and turn it into a grid very easily. So with that knowledge, we can seamlessly transition from this mobile view into the tablet view. And then same thing, we're gonna go tablet view to larger desktop view, and we're gonna consider adding a 3rd column here. Now that we have the space for it, we could make this smaller, and instead of having this add to cart button so low, now we can pop this thing up in the top right and have it in a prominent position for a regular website. Knowing how all of these columns can expand and collapse will just really empower you to put these little mobile components into different columns and expand them as needed. And then once we have those key screens designed, there's really nothing that says I need to design, especially when you're dealing with low fidelity design, you don't need to design mobile, tablet, desktop, mobile, tablet, desktop, mobile, tablet, desktop on every single screen. Once you have that basic layout finished, you can definitely just plow through newsletter, about us, FAQs, login, all these different video screens, dealer page, headquarters, press and reviews. They all have the same basic layout. And so now we can just plow through all of these components. And if we're doing low fidelity design, this is really helpful just to get everything on the page. I'm not that worried about color and imagery and style necessarily right now. I'm just kind of focusing on typography and layout, figuring out all these different little modules and what's going to be in a list view, what's going to be in a grid view, all these different little things for account, exchange, return label, lots and lots of different screens that I know once we have this basic layout, we can very easily then transition into full-on high fidelity designs. Or maybe we started at high fidelity and we're doing the same kind of process. This is just low fidelity examples that I've done in the past, so it's easy to dig through as examples for mobile first. All right, one last mobile first example. This was a responsive web app for monitoring thermal cameras that were taking images of machinery and alerting someone if there was a temperature spike. So pretty complicated project. So I'm gonna without a doubt, start this one mobile first and definitely low fidelity, just because I got to figure out the functionality here, figure out all the components, the modules, and have lots and lots of conversations with the client and all the people involved about just functionality in general. We're not worried about 2 wide, 3 wide, 4 column wide. We have to just figure out how this thing's going to work. So starting mobile first on a project like that, in my opinion, is just absolutely critical. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on all this stuff. I've got links to all these so you can go in and you can dig into all these files and kind of check them out. But I'm just kind of simply laying these out by feature. So here's our onboarding, settings, dashboard, assets, cameras, all this stuff. And then I actually was able to link up this prototype. So I've got the first time user experience, the dashboard, different little prototypes here that you can click on and you can actually look at and see what happens when I create my account. Got optional info. And one thing that I like to do on mobile first designs, especially when I'm working in low fidelity, sometimes I'll add these little annotations just to let someone know, both options are going to go to the user dashboard. So if I fill out the optional info, then it's going to take me to the dashboard. But if I hit skip for now, it's also going to take me to the dashboard. So I can just put in little notes like that for the developer or for anyone that wants to look at this and really know what happens. So I'll click that and you can see I'm on the dashboard here and I can create a new asset, blah, blah, blah. So just lots and lots and lots of things that would be actually pretty challenging to design it desktop first, because you almost have to make more decisions when you're on the desktop. You have to decide on layout a lot more than you do than when you're on mobile, because on mobile, everything is straight up and down, forces that priority. So again, when I'm working on responsive web apps and there's application, there's functionality, and it's a little bit complicated, I will always, always, always design mobile first, just because it forces that constraint and makes it much, much easier to just figure out the rest once you have that first part nailed down. Okay, so that's mobile first design. Now I want to talk about the times when I like to design desktop first. Again, there's going to be difference of opinions online about whether you should go desktop first or not. And again, I've let you know I'm a huge proponent of mobile first. But the times when I go desktop first, most of the time it's for a marketing website, because marketing sites can often be an exercise of just pure creativity. And a lot of times a mobile view, it doesn't give me a lot of room to explore and push ideas around. And it's a different kind of a design challenge, because you're on a marketing website, there's less functionality to worry about. Usually it's gonna be, a scrolling website. There's a few things to click on. There's not a lot of functionality. So it's really more about how you can make it look nice, more about the concept and the style. So a lot of times when I'm designing a website that is purely for marketing, I'm always going to start with a desktop design first. All right, so the first example I want to show you of a desktop first marketing website is this FlowKit 1.0. You can see I got my big view right here. And then once I nailed all of this stuff down, lots and lots of elaborate flows and designs and colors and all of this stuff, only then did I go back in and try to kind of shoehorn this stuff into the mobile view. And a lot of times I will end up leaving this undesigned so I can make some decisions in code. But when it's a design like this, you kind of need to have this graphic is not really going to work on a mobile view. So I actually created a new graphic to kind of swap the image out. As it got smaller, it would switch the image out. But I didn't just start off with this one design and just design it all the way through. If you look at some of my earlier designs, you can see I've got artboard after artboard after artboard of these unused designs where I'm experimenting, really just throwing stuff around, trying to make something look good, trying to come up with some good ideas, just over and over and over. So just for fun, let's check out some of these. Like, this was one of the first designs that I was like, oh, I really like the idea of all these flows. So I spent a lot of time just building this out, just making something look nice. And then I designed these little icons. And then I thought, well, maybe it would be cool to show this like transparent background. And so I started playing, okay, well, maybe this could be the mobile version. Maybe I need to like add some more stuff. So I'm just experimenting with different layouts. Maybe I have this like weird right edge opened up and the button is fixed like as you're scrolling through. And then I started writing all this stuff and I tried to come up with this thing and I felt like, no, this feels like a textbook. Like, user flows are already boring enough. It's kind of a dry topic and I wanted this to feel a lot more fun. So I was getting a little bit off track here. So I was like, I need to redo this. and I'm going to just bring in like something a lot more fun. I'm going to bring in some big gradients. Maybe I'll have this little interactive thing. Then I designed this little, like, this is like a little simple like Twitter illustration, like a kind of a low fidelity illustration. And then just trying to experiment with like this little like custom builder, like maybe I could create something cool. So I'm really just cycling through all these different designs. I even designed this where you could have this interactive thing, but this felt just too complex. And I was like, I need to make this simpler. I need it to feel more fun. So I started trying out gradients, simple colors. I mean, just on and on and on. I did a lot of these designs until ultimately I kind of settled on this one. And then I, designed it out, made it tighter, and just kept iterating through it. And then I went to that mobile version. So if I would have started on the mobile version on this particular website, there's no way I would have come up with this design, just because you kind of just need the room to explore if you want to make a really creative marketing site. Same thing with this contrast website. I started with the desktop designs and I was like, man, how can I show like a bunch of really cool colors, make it feel fun, and not get bogged down in the details of accessibility, because it can be some dry information. I wanted this to be big and bold. And so I just started making shapes. I made a giant rectangle and just started rotating it. And I started playing around with medium shapes and big shapes and small shapes. I need a big canvas to explore and experiment and kind of play with these kind of interesting crops for the shapes. And then, only then, I'm like, okay, let's see how I can make this work on mobile. Like maybe there's not room for this purple or pink dot. I could possibly like reposition this thing behind here. But it felt like on mobile, it just felt like it was getting a little bit it just felt like it was kind of getting in the way. I wasn't really adding that much. I could have put it right there, but it just felt like it wasn't as interesting. So I ended up just taking it completely out on mobile. And you can hide things and show things when the browser gets smaller, when it gets larger. You can choose, okay, when it gets smaller, I'm going to hide that element. Same way that you can change the layout, you can also hide it and show it. And so that's what I'm experimenting with here on this mobile version. Here's another example of this Switch to Studio website where I went through a bunch of different versions of a possible home screen. And, I almost went with this design because I had these big cards and I kind of like these illustrations and these colors. But then I just thought maybe I could play around with some like big juxtaposition, like some big typography, like really, really big, and have this stuff just peeking up. And again, like there's no way I would have designed this if I was just looking at a mobile screen. You might be different. You might thrive designing something like this for mobile, but the way my mind works, and when I'm just trying to explore fun, creative ideas, I just want these big canvases to throw things around and to really just play with a bunch of different concepts. You can see here's another one that I tried that was like big text everywhere. It was kind of hard to see that, kind of hard to read. So, that didn't end up using that, but this is pretty close to what it ended up being. And then once I got this, I'm like, okay, this kind of works. I'll try the same thing with like the calls to action. I'll have these little things off to the side. And because I was the one who was going to code this once it was done, I actually didn't even design a mobile version, because in my mind, I already knew this was going to swap down here. These are going to end up going like this, and they're going to scale down. And this stuff right here is just going to get squished down like this. So I didn't even bother designing it because I knew I could just make a few tweaks in the code. So you can see here on the live site, got all these modules here, little animation. And so if I open up Inspector and we go into the responsive mode, you can see what's going to happen here. Remember, if we have, imagine block 1, block 2, block 3, 4, 5, we can reposition those. We can make them smaller. And then we've got a 3-grid layout. We're going to switch to a 2-grid here in just a second. Right there we go. And then we're just actually going to stay in the 2-grid for a little while. But once we got smaller, I tried out the 2-wide grid on a mobile device and it just didn't quite feel right. So I decided to go ahead and go full width on these big tiles here. With the knowledge of those blocks and the way you can manipulate all of them, it's really, really helpful to kind of understand that and to understand the constraints when you're scaling between the two different sizes. And another last example here, the marketing site for the My Monero app. I actually only did one desktop design. I didn't even bother doing the mobile design, and I did not even code this. I was in constant communication with the developer while I was working on the project, and I designed the desktop version. And I know that if I have this desktop version, that if we were going to go in here and make this a mobile version, I know that this is gonna fly down here. This is gonna scale down. Even if this needs to get to be 375, that's 375 pixels wide. All of this stuff I know is just gonna like move over a little. I don't really need to do this, but you get the idea. You can move all this over, make the text a little smaller, and you can scale your images down. So it's fairly simple to know like things are going to scale down, and this is kind of what's going to happen. And so I didn't even need to design the mobile version, because I told the developer, I'll design a mobile version if you need to, but really we're just going to this stuff's going to fly into a single column grid instead of a 2-column grid. And you can kind of look and imagine, what this stuff would look like. And, this would kind of just turn into a single line. So once you have that understanding of what's possible and what can happen, sometimes you don't even have to design both versions. If you're in that communication channel with a developer, they know what's going to happen. You're going to review maybe some of the decisions that they make. Sometimes you can get the websites built and designed up to like 80%, 90% done, and then hand it off because you've been in communication the whole time. And now that they're writing the code, you can make those additional changes kind of as they're working on it. And the feedback loop just goes back and forth, back and forth. So it's going to be really helpful to kind of understand just that basic framework and kind of just that basic understanding of left to right, top to bottom flow, and then all the different kind of positions that you can put an entire screen in, and how all of that same constraint information can apply to a single component as well, like an image and a title and an icon and a little subtitle or some bottom type information. That can all apply to a tiny little component the same way that it can to a multi-column layout on the actual screen. Okay, so for homework, I've got a few assignments for you. On this one, I want you to review all of those code pins. If you haven't already, kind of go and click around, open them up, resize your browser, and just kind of methodically study what happens when you click all of those different icons, what happens when you scale the browsers up and down, and just try to understand and learn the nature of responsive websites. And then for your actual design, I want you to design a mobile view of something that has like 3 to 5 sections in it. It could be a detail of your favorite product page, or it might be like a pricing page on some software, or anything else you can come up with. Just something with like 3 to 5 sections. Maybe it's a navigation, a big image, and some other stuff. And you can use low fidelity design with just X's in the gray. You can, use the low fidelity template or the style that I've done mine in, create your own, or you can go all out and just do a full-on design. But a mobile view of like 375 of like 3 to 5 sections. And then secondly, design that iPad view like 786 wide or 800, somewhere along in that range. Try to shift that information into at least like 2 columns, the same way that we looked at in some of those wireframe PDFs. And just like in those PDFs, create your third view where you might go 3 columns wide or 4 columns wide, or maybe you keep it 2 columns, but they stretch out a little bit more. And maybe you get like 3 of those lined up beside each other, mobile, tablet, desktop. Low fidelity is fine. You don't need to try to go all out unless you want to. That's totally cool as well. But just try to get that basic understanding, design the mobile, tablet, and then computer size as well. So best of luck to you on that, and I can't wait to see what you come up with.